When certain dog breeds come up, people often have really strong opinions, don't they? Striking images come to mind.
They really do.
But often, beneath all that, there's this deep history, a purpose, carefully shaped by dedicated people.
Exactly. And today, we're not just scratching the surface.
No, we're planning to dive way down.
We're doing a deep dive into the story of the American Pit Bull Terrier, the APBT, and the American Dog Breeders Association, the ADBA.
Right. And our guide for this is Chico Lopez from APBT INFO. We've been looking closely at his insights.
Yeah, we've pulled excerpts from a YouTube video where he shares just a ton of experience. His perspective is pretty unique.
It really is. So our mission today, you could say, is to get a real handle on the breed's origins, its original purpose, and how the ADBA fits into preserving it.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this with Chico's viewpoint. He calls himself a guerrero.
A warrior, yeah, in the dog world. Someone with like a lifetime of real hands-on experience.
And what I found really interesting is how he talks about the APBT today. He calls it a heritage.
A heritage.
Yeah, something that was meticulously worked, built, developed, his words, over generations.
Through deliberate selection, right? Not just random breeding.
Exactly. It was all focused on getting this specific balance, physical and mental qualities.
And he talks about those inherent qualities, like the gigantic heart.
Right, but he's quick to point out that's metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
It refers to their gameness, their determination, that refusal to quit.
So it's not just about being tough, but about this deep drive.
Yeah.
In the context of their history, gameness meant pushing through exhaustion, pain even, a really prized trait for what they were originally bred for.
And understanding that concept of gameness, it kind of pushes back against a lot of the common misconceptions.
Yeah, Chico's very blunt about challenging the media stuff, the whole killer dog image.
He really is. He argues that negative image comes from irresponsible owners misusing what he calls a beautiful product.
He shared that story, didn't he?
Yeah.
About a kid and a baby interacting gently with an APBT.
Yeah, quite a powerful counter-image to the aggressive stereotype.
It really makes you think about the impact of, environment and training on any animal.
Definitely. And Chico also connects this back to the breed's roots, mentioning Brazil and the sort of inherent nature to do the tasks they were bred for. Like they have an ingrained purpose.
Okay, so then he brings in this really crucial figure, the Perrero.
The dogman.
Right, the dogman. He explains how the APBT lineage was basically established by these herreros, another term he uses, over 100 years.
With really detailed records, too, tracking generations, temperaments, abilities.
So these weren't just casual breeders. They were knowledgeable, keeping meticulous notes on bloodlines. That was key to shaping the APBT's characteristics.
Absolutely. And Chico really stresses the importance of the Perrero. He sees them as the guardians of the breed's true nature.
He even contrasts it with newer breeds, like the bully.
Right, suggesting their development maybe lack that experienced Herrero guidance in the selection.
Which brings us to the U.S. development, right? He places that mostly between the 1930s and 60s.
Yeah, and he says the foundation stock came from England. These imported dogs he calls grandmasters, or dogs with más puntos.
Meaning they had a significant track record, proven ability in whatever their original function was.
Exactly. And those imports brought specific things like incredible tenacity in the pit, that ability to endure, and a really powerful muscular build. Strength and agility.
Essential for close combat.
Yeah.
These became like the building blocks for the American Pit Bull Terrier.
And Chico gives this fascinating historical backdrop. He talks about working-class guys in the U.S. back then.
Yeah, no Nintendo, no multiplex cinemas.
Right. None of the distractions we have. So for them, owning and engaging with these combat animals was a form of entertainment, social interaction.
And he's very clear that selection, for that specific purpose, for dogfighting, was the main driver shaping the breed then.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from that historical reality.
He even mentions Pan's arenas for these fights, places like Kentucky. It suggests it was, if not accepted, certainly prevalent at the time.
But then society changes, norms shift.
And the perception of the breed changed dramatically. Chico suggests society became, in his words, weaker, leading to the APBT becoming illegal in many places.
And he draws that really direct line between the dog and its owner. He says that dog has a lot to do with who you are.
He talks about his own start. The specific bloodlines like Rose York and Boudio, those were known lines, right? Breeders knew what traits they carried.
Exactly. And he uses that analogy, the person in a small apartment whose little dog kind of reflects their own confined life.
Yeah, it really hits home, that idea that the dog can be an extension of the owner's identity.
Which then leads into the problems caused by irresponsible ownership. He talks about mascoteros.
Pet owners, basically.
Right, people who didn't understand the breed's traits and tried to train them improperly, like forguarding, or worse, being aggressive towards kids.
And he describes how that wrong approach, breeding aggressive dogs with aggressive dogs, bravo con bravo, he calls it, created unbalanced animals.
Totally different from the original, more stable temperament they aimed for.
And those incidents, the bites, the problems.
As Chico points out, they led directly to dangerous dog laws, breed-specific legislation. The actions of a few had huge consequences for everyone who owned the breed.
It's fascinating when he talks about the rules within the dogfighting world back then.
Yeah, like Les Fuerzas de Perro, rules of the dog game, and Les Armes de Traz, rules about stuff outside the actual contest. It suggests a certain structure.
Even within something now condemned, there were codes, understandings.
Definitely. And he tells that story about a meeting in Sledge, Mississippi, these gentlemen, working class guys, but with a deep, practical knowledge of the fighting rules.
And in this figure, Del Brazo, the arm man from California.
Yeah, Chico describes him as young, educated, and the one who actually wrote down the rules of the Cajón, the specific pit rules.
And then Lady Bigot enters the picture. She saw the writing on the wall, the threat of the breed being banned.
Right, and she wanted to create something for people who supported the breed but didn't fight dogs, a way to preserve the original type.
So she sought out Del Brazo.
Specifically to help establish rules for a conformation standard, the ideal physical structure.
And Chico mentions 6 specific dogs that Del Brazo evaluated as being prime examples of that original type.
It wasn't just about looks, it was about that balance between fighting ability and the physical form needed for it.
Things like the Pagata original, that original bite or grip, and the overall balanced build, how everything worked together for combat.
It was about functional athleticism, not just aggression. Every part of their structure had a purpose related to their function.
Which kind of loops back to the ADBA's role today.
Exactly. Chico explains that now the focus is on dog shows, using those established rules.
But instead of fighting, they're judging appearance and force.
Right. Looking at the physical structure, the musculature, the build, to see which dogs most closely match that original fighting animal's balanced athleticism.
Assessing things like jaw structure, muscle tone, how they move, all in relation to that historical function. But crucially, without any actual fighting.
So the ADBA, in Chico's view, is working to preserve that heritage he talked about at the start, keeping that link to the history through conformation.
And he really stresses that understanding this whole history is still super important for anyone involved with APBTs today.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's sort of pull this together. We've heard about the APBT's complex heritage, deliberately shaped for specific balanced traits.
Right, and that the negative image is often tied to irresponsible ownership, people not understanding the breed's nature.
And how organizations like the ADBA are trying to preserve that original type through standards based on its history.
Ultimately, really getting to grips with the history and purpose seems vital, not just for responsible ownership, but maybe for challenging those persistent negative stereotypes.
Yeah, it really does. Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe for you, the listener, to chew on. Society has changed so much, and the roles animals play in our lives have shifted too. So what responsibility do we have now to understand and maybe even preserve the original purpose and traits of breeds like the APBT?
It's definitely a complex question. Lots to think about there.